He climbed into the attic and saw a tree growing right out of the roof, but he didn't know what years had hidden beneath it. See what made him dial 911. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. I had never intended to start over in a place like this, in a house that looked as if it had been forgotten by the century that birthed it. But when I pulled my truck onto the gravel drive and stepped out into the cold Pennsylvania air, something in the silence around me felt almost like permission. After the divorce, after losing the home I had spent years renovating with my own hands, after the long, bitter unraveling of a marriage that had died well before the papers were signed, I needed something that didn't remind me of what had already collapsed. I needed a structure that was broken in ways I at least understood, a place I could fix plank by plank while I figured out how to fix myself. The house stood at the end of an old county road, the kind that barely appeared on modern maps. 2 stories, wide porch, sagging under its own weight, windows clouded over with dirt and neglect. From the listing photos I had known it needed work, but in person it seemed older, heavier, as if it had been carrying someone else's burden for far too long. Still, the price had been so low, it was almost laughable cheap enough that even a divorced contractor with dwindling savings could afford it. That alone should have raised questions, but at the time, I hadn't wanted to ask any. Inside, the air smelled like damp wood, dust, and the faint metallic scent of abandoned spaces. My boots echoed against the hardwood floor, and with every creak came a memory of the homes I used to rebuild, the rhythm familiar enough to steady my breathing. Yet even in that comfort, something felt off. Not dangerous, just wrong. The floor plan on the county records had shown a series of rooms on the first floor, arranged in a neat rectangle. But when I walked the length of the hallway, counting the turns, a gap revealed itself, an entire corner where there should have been a door, a window, a space. Instead, there was only a blank, uneven wall, covered in an extra thick layer of paint and plaster. I leaned close and ran my hand along the surface. Underneath the paint, I could feel faint ridges, vertical, evenly spaced, like wood boards buried under plaster. It made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Someone had sealed this room deliberately, and not decades ago like the rest of the house. It was recent. I scraped my fingernail along the wall, and a thin layer of white dust fell to the floor. Whoever did this didn't want anyone going in, or anything coming out. I stepped back, taking in the proportions. According to the blueprint, this should have been a study or a guest room, but the way it was sealed felt wrong. A homeowner sealing off an unused room was strange enough, but the craftsmanship of the closure boards across the inside, plaster applied, after suggested someone who understood construction. Someone who wanted the room not merely closed, but erased. On the blueprint, the room still existed, but during later renovations or inspections, it had somehow disappeared from the record. I knew forged documents when I saw them. I'd bought houses from shady flippers before. But this wasn't cosmetic fraud. It felt like a concealment, a barrier. For a moment, I simply stood there, the silence of the house pressing in from all sides. Then I shook it off. Houses were full of oddities, half-finished projects, improvised fixes, abandoned upgrades. I'd seen much stranger in my line of work, and I wasn't about to let some sealed wall intimidate me before I'd even unpacked. Upstairs, the air was colder. The boards groaned under my weight as I climbed to the second floor and followed the narrow stairway to the attic. The listing had mentioned nothing about the attic beyond a vague note about ample storage. So when I pushed open the hatch and pulled myself into the dim space above, I expected dust, cobwebs, and the occasional abandoned trunk. Instead, I froze. At first glance, the attic looked almost ordinary low beams, slanted ceiling, scattered debris. But in the center of the space stood something that did not belong in any house, let alone an attic. A tree. A full, living tree. Its trunk thick and sturdy, its bark rough and dark, its branches stretching upward until they disappeared into a crude opening carved into the roof. Light filtered in through the gap, illuminating green leaves that looked unnaturally healthy for the season. This wasn't a sapling that had somehow forced its way up from the ground. This was a tree that someone had planted intentionally. I stepped closer, disbelief tightening my throat. The base of the tree sat inside a square metal container, heavy, industrial, reinforced, as if built to hold more weight than soil should require. Pipes connected the container to the far wall, old and rusted, yet still intact. And beneath the container, where a few roots poked through gaps in the metal, the wood of the attic floor bulged slightly downward, toward the direction of the sealed room below. The realization made the hairs on my arms stand up. The roots weren't growing outward, they were growing downward, following a path straight to the sealed room. I crouched and touched the floor near the warped boards. The wood was firm but cool, as if whatever lay beneath it had drawn the heat away. I leaned closer to inspect the setup. Whoever had constructed this had gone to significant effort. The container, the bracketed reinforcement beams, the irrigation pipe that had once fed water from somewhere in the house. This wasn't some quirky hobby. It was a system, engineered, purposeful. And that purpose was tied to the hidden room below. When I stepped back, the tree's leaves rustled faintly despite the absence of wind. For a moment, the sound was so gentle it calmed me. Then it unnerved me. There was no reason for leaves in a sealed attic to move, unless something stirred the air. I looked around for a draft but found nothing. The tree simply stood there, alive and thriving against all logic. I didn't sleep that first night. Instead, I sat on the porch with a thermos of lukewarm coffee, staring at the dark outline of the house. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the sealed room, the tree, the mismatch of plans and reality. In the distance, a car passed by slowly, almost hesitantly, before continuing down the road. The engine faded, leaving behind only the sound of wind in the trees. The next morning, I met the first of my neighbors. A woman in her 60s walked her dog by my front yard. When I greeted her, she paused, studied me, then forced a polite smile. "You bought the Turner place," she said. "Didn't think anyone would." "Turner?" I asked. "Previous owner?" She nodded. "Miles Turner. Lived here alone until he left." "Left?" I echoed. Her eyes flicked to the house, then quickly away. She tightened her grip on the leash. "No one knows for sure," she said. "Some say he moved away. Others say he got himself into trouble. He was always tinkering with things, closing off parts of the house. Strange man." She hesitated. "If you find anything odd, maybe. Just be careful." Before I could ask more, she tugged the dog along and hurried away. That conversation set the tone for the rest of the day. Every neighbor I met seemed nervous, guarded. When I mentioned renovations, people grew tense. When I mentioned the sealed room, even casually faces tightened, and voices dropped. One man mumbled something about not going digging where you don't need to. Another warned me to leave the past alone. No one said anything outright. But every hint pointed to the same conclusion. Something had happened in this house. Something no one wanted to talk about. By late afternoon, curiosity had evolved into determination. I returned inside, grabbed a toolbox, and examined the sealed room again. The wall wasn't simply patched. It was layered boards nailed horizontally on the inside. Then vertical boards over those. Then plaster spread thickly across the surface, as if someone wanted to disguise the barricade entirely. And beneath it all, faint traces of earth clung to the seams, as if someone had stuffed dirt into the cracks. It didn't feel like a renovation project anymore. It felt like excavation. That night, lying awake on a temporary mattress in the living room, I listened to the house settle. The wind pressed against the windows, and the wooden frame answered with deep, low groans. I should have been exhausted, but my mind kept returning to the tree and its roots, the sealed room, the vanished owner. I thought about the neighbor's warnings. I thought about the blueprint that didn't match the house I stood in. And beneath all of it, a tension I couldn't name brewed slowly, patiently, like a storm gathering behind the hills. By the third day, I stopped pretending I was here for peace. I was here because this house demanded answers. And I wasn't the kind of man who turned his back on a structure that needed understanding. I brought a hammer and chisel to the wall. My heart thudded in my chest as I pressed the tool to the plaster. For a moment I hesitated, listening to the quiet hallway around me. Then I struck. The first blow cracked the plaster. The second sent flakes tumbling to the floor. Underneath, wood grain emerged, old but sturdy. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sense that I was crossing a threshold. Blow by blow, the wall gave way. Behind the boards, the air felt different, cooler, stale, tinged with something metallic. I paused, listening. The faintest vibration hummed through the wood, like an old machine buried beneath layers of time. I drove the chisel under the last board, pried it free, and watched it clatter to the floor. Beyond it, darkness yawned like a throat. I took a breath, stepped forward, and crossed into the room the house had tried to swallow. The moment my foot touched the floor inside, I knew everything was about to change. The air inside the sealed room felt older than the rest of the house, as if it had been trapped for years without the chance to exchange itself with the outside world. The moment I stepped over the threshold, the stale heaviness settled against my skin, and the temperature dropped enough to make me shiver. I paused just inside, letting my eyes adjust to the murky dimness, while the faint hum I had heard through the boards vibrated under my boots. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, like the whisper of an old machine running deep underground. I raised my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior, expecting perhaps a bare chamber or empty storage space. Instead, what I saw made me take a slow, involuntary step backward. The room was filled, completely overtaken by the roots of the tree above. They twisted down from the ceiling, slid along the walls, and burrowed deep into the floor, weaving through the boards with almost architectural precision. Soil had been packed between them, forming a heavy, layered crust across the entire room. It was as if the tree had been encouraged to claim the space, to anchor itself into every corner. The walls bore marks indentations, where someone had once installed beams or metal braces, the remnants barely visible now beneath the tangled root network. I knelt and pressed my fingers to one of the roots. It was dry, hard, and old. But it hadn't grown here naturally. This had been engineered, shaped, forced downward by some human hand with a purpose I couldn't yet grasp. A house didn't need a hidden biome growing inside its skeleton. A person did not build something like this without reason. The smell was thick and earthy, mixed with the faint sharpness of metal. I noticed scraps of paper trapped in the soil. I brushed away dirt and uncovered the corner of what looked like a torn envelope. As I pulled it free, a few more bits of soil tumbled to the floor, releasing small puffs of that old, sealed-in scent. The envelope was brittle and empty. The ink blurred from years of moisture. It had no name, no address, just a faded date from 2 decades ago. That alone made me feel the weight of something approaching significance. With careful steps, I moved deeper into the room. The floor creaked beneath me, some boards soft and warped under the weight of the packed soil. I needed to understand how deep the earth went, how far the roots reached. My flashlight caught on something metallic under the soil. Kneeling again, I scraped away the dirt until a rusted iron corner emerged. A small box. I dug further and lifted it out with both hands. The weight surprised me. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold even through layers of dirt. A simple latch held it shut, but it was rusted through. A quick twist with my screwdriver loosened it enough to pry open. Inside, bundled tightly inside waterproof wrapping, were documents. Real documents. I recognized the feel and smell of old paper stored in sealed environments, handles from envelopes, aged cardstock, binders' edges. The topmost item was a passport bound in blue. My heart jolted slightly when I read the name. Miles Turner. The man no one wanted to talk about. The man who owned this house before I did. A man who had simply vanished, leaving behind a structure that seemed saturated with secrecy. Under the passport lay several folded maps. The paper was yellowed and soft, threatening to crumble if handled too roughly. When I unfolded one of them, my flashlight illuminated a cluster of plotted points marked with red ink, each one labeled with numbers and notations that had no immediate meaning. The area looked like the county's forested region. There were crossed-out lines, rerouted boundaries, and shaded areas that looked like zones of illegal activity. Logging, maybe. Land transfers. Something off the books. Beneath the maps lay receipts checks with partial carbon copies, still pressed faintly into the paper. Lists of names, amounts paid monthly or quarterly. Payouts for silence, bribes, payoffs. My breath thickened in my throat as I turned through the stack, realizing the scale in front of me. This wasn't a one-off incident or a misunderstanding. It was a network, a system, one that extended far beyond this house. I set the documents aside and turned my attention to a darker, heavier object, half buried under the soil. It took time to unearth it. My hands worked through layers of root and dirt until the metal surface revealed itself. A safe. Not a large one, but compact, and built with a seriousness that suggested its contents were meant to be protected. I brushed away more dirt and felt the cold edge of the dial beneath my fingers. There was no chance I'd know the combination, but I had tools, and the lock was old. It took several minutes of careful manipulation and a little force before the latch gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, the air smelled strangely preserved, as though time hadn't moved within the safe. Flash drives, some modern, some older, and 2 external hard drives lay neatly arranged. Next to them was a laptop, the casing worn but intact. Beneath it, bound tightly in a thick envelope, were printed transcripts, conversations, judging by the snippets of words I could read through the vellum. But it was the final item that sent a slow chill down my spine. A single sheet of paper folded in half. Miles's handwriting, loopy, uneven, the script of a man in a rush or under strain. I unfolded it gently. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. Hide everything. Destroy the rest. They will come back. They always come back. I stared at those 3 sentences until the letters seemed to blur. My pulse beat in my ears, and the quiet hum of the room felt louder now, as if the buried machine sensed my shift in understanding. This wasn't just a sealed room. This wasn't just a strange engineering experiment. This was evidence of corruption, conspiracy, maybe murder. Evidence someone had wanted hidden so badly, they built a biological vault inside the bones of the house. My better instincts told me to stop, to leave the room, to walk outside, to call authorities. But even as that thought formed, another voice rose louder inside me, the same voice that had driven me into construction years ago. The voice that hated unanswered questions, that refused to leave a job unfinished. I needed to see more. I needed to know what exactly Miles Turner had been trying to expose, and who would kill to keep it buried. As I reached deeper into the safe to pull out the laptop, something shifted overhead. The ceiling creaked with weight. I froze, listening. It wasn't the typical settling of old beams. This was sharper, quicker, accompanied by the faint scrape of movement. Not footsteps, at least, not natural ones. Almost as if something brushed along the attic floor above me. Then the low murmur of voices drifted through the house. My body went still, every muscle tightening. They were inside. Whoever they weren't there by accident. The sound came from the hallway, then the living room. Slow, measured footsteps. 2 voices. Men, speaking just loudly enough for the cadence to carry through the walls. I pressed myself into the shadowed corner of the room, cursing every creak of the old boards beneath my shoes. My flashlight felt like a beacon, so I clicked it off, plunging the room into near blackness. The soft hum from the hidden machinery filled my ears. My breath came shallow. "Check the wall," one of the voices said. "He might have opened it." I felt my heartbeat hammer through my chest. They knew about the room. They expected someone to come looking, and they'd come to stop it. The other voice answered, lower, heavier. "If he opened it, we take everything and clean the place out. No loose ends. We should have torched it years ago." Torch it? My mind raced. They were talking about my house, my property, my life. They spoke with the casual confidence of men who had done this before, who had cleaned up messes for years and expected no resistance now. I couldn't stay where I was. I needed a place to hide, a place they wouldn't expect. My eyes darted across the room, the roots, the soil, the corner where the board separated slightly above the base molding. There, an old ventilation shaft, barely wide enough for a grown man. I moved silently toward it, easing my fingers around the loosened panel. It groaned, but only faintly. I lifted it free and squeezed myself inside, clutching the envelope, one of the flash drives, and the folded letter against my chest. The metal duct was cold and cramped, but it was concealment. The men's footsteps drew closer. One tapped the plaster outside, testing it. I held my breath until my lungs ached. Their shadows crossed the blocked doorway's gap, barely visible from my vantage point. One muttered something about getting tools from the truck. They planned to break in, one way or another. The duct angled upward toward the attic, and I pulled myself forward inch by inch, careful to stay quiet. Once I reached the top, I slid out behind the tree's massive trunk, hidden by its bulk. The attic creaked again as one of the men stepped directly below me. "We do this fast," the voice said. "We don't want attention." "I thought he'd be gone all day," the other replied. Damn idiot couldn't just leave the house alone. They were talking about me. I felt a mixture of fear and anger tighten inside my chest. I needed to get out before they found the empty ventilation shaft or noticed footprints in the soil below. I moved toward the far side of the attic, where a narrow pull door led to a crawl space that connected to the backside of the house. My hands shook as I lifted it, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, silently. The door opened, and I slid inside the darkness, careful not to dislodge debris. On the other side was a small hatch that led down to the laundry room. The moment my feet hit the floor, I sprinted for the back door, gripping the evidence against my chest. A board creaked upstairs. Someone had moved. I didn't wait to see whether they heard me. I slipped outside, staying low, hugging the shadows of the siding. The air felt colder than before. The evening sky dimmed behind a veil of clouds, and the world narrowed to the need to run, to escape, to reach someone who could help. I kept to the trees as I fled the property. Branches snapped underfoot, and twice I nearly stumbled, but adrenaline carried me forward. My breath steamed in the night air. Behind me, the house glowed faintly from a single bedroom light I must have left on. I wondered if the men were watching the yard, scanning for movement. I couldn't afford to slow down. I followed the old trail leading from the backyard toward the main road, dodging between pines whose needles brushed my face. The ground dipped and rose with the shape of the land. I had to get to town, to people, to security cameras, witnesses, anything that proved I had left the property before those men could catch me. Every few moments, I glanced back. At one point, headlights cut through the trees in the distance, the hum of an engine. They were searching the roads. My grip tightened on the metal safe I'd managed to carry with me. It felt like carrying the weight of someone else's truth. A man who had vanished because he tried to expose what he knew. A man whose last message was now clutched in my freezing hand. Somewhere behind me, I heard a shout. They knew I was gone. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs, the stitch forming in my side. The forest opened abruptly into a clearing where an old gas station stood, its lights flickering under a buzzing sign. Relief flooded through me. Civilization. Cameras. People. I stumbled toward the door and burst inside. The attendant looked up, startled, as I slammed the safe onto the counter, my chest heaving. "Call the police," I gasped. "Right now. Someone tried to kill me. This," I slapped the safe, "is proof of everything." Behind me, through the glass door, the road remained dark, but I knew the men were still out there, and I knew they were not finished with me. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just opened a sealed room. I had opened a buried war, and the enemy had been waiting for me to do it. The police station in Willow Creek was a squat, rectangular building with a slanted roof, the kind that looked as though it had been built in the 70s and never once renovated. The fluorescent lights inside hummed with a tired determination, casting a pale sheen on the linoleum floors. I sat in a narrow interview room, my clothes still damp from the run through the forest, my hands trembling slightly, though not from the cold anymore. The safe sat on the table between me and the detective, its metal surface dull under the overhead lamp. The envelope and the single flash drive I'd pulled out before fleeing lay beside it, their edges smudged with dirt from the sealed room. Detective Harris was a broad-chested man in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and an expression permanently caught between irritation and worry. He flipped through the documents I had brought, pausing occasionally, his eyebrows tightening as he read. Every so often he looked at me, not with disbelief, but with the caution of someone who had seen enough strange things in small towns to avoid assuming anything too quickly. "You're telling me 2 men broke into your house," he said after several minutes, "searched for this room, and you escaped through a ventilation shaft? That's creative." "It was survival," I replied. My voice was flat, exhausted. "And they weren't just men looking for copper pipes or valuables. They knew exactly what they wanted and exactly where to find it." He nodded, glancing again at the maps. "These markings." He traced a finger over one of the red-circled zones. "I've seen these areas before. A lot of disputes over land use around here, environmental complaints, suspicious buying patterns from companies we never get full names for." "That's what Miles was tracking," I said. "He must have been collecting evidence for years. The roots, the sealed room. They weren't hiding plants. They were hiding paper. Metal. Hard drives." Harris rubbed his chin. "You think Turner was killed for it? I think he tried to expose something, and I think whoever wanted this room sealed thought he succeeded. They were wrong. Or right," the detective replied quietly. "We don't know where Turner is." The room felt colder at that moment, not from temperature, but from realization. Whether Turner had disappeared himself or been disappeared by others, the implications were the same. The safe and its contents were dangerous. And now, they were tied to me. Harris closed the folder and stood. "We'll send patrols to your house. If anyone's still there, we'll find them." But I'll tell you this, Michael. This is bigger than our department. Bigger than this county. Maybe bigger than the state. I felt a knot form in my stomach. So what do I do? For now? Stay here. Let us handle the rest. The idea of staying in a locked building under fluorescent lights while strangers tore apart my house made me restless. But I nodded anyway. I didn't have much choice. My body felt drained, my limbs heavy with fatigue. A police officer brought me a cup of coffee that tasted like burned dirt, but it helped steady my hands. Hours passed. I heard radios crackle, footsteps move, doors open and close. The muffled chatter of officers drifted through the hallway. At one point, Harris returned briefly to say they had found signs of forced entry at the house, but no men. They knew how to disappear, he said grimly, and they knew when to run. Sometime past midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with me. A folded blanket and a hard plastic chair became my bed. I slept in fits, waking to the fluorescent flicker overhead, then drifting off again. When morning came, Harris was waiting. "We've confirmed some of the documents," he said without preamble. "Land swaps, property under false names, illegal clearing. Not small operations. Organized, coordinated. Turner was onto something real. And the men? Gone. But they'll surface. People like that always do." His tone had changed since last night. There was no skepticism now, only the caution of a man who understood the stakes. "You'll need protection," he added, "at least until we know who's involved." "I'm not leaving the house," I said. "Not after what I found. Not after what Turner left behind. That property is part of the evidence." He hesitated, clearly debating whether to argue. "Fine," he finally said. "But we're assigning someone to you. You won't be there alone." I wasn't sure how I felt about having a stranger in my house, but the alternative was worse. Being vulnerable, being watched, being hunted. So I agreed. By noon, I was riding back toward the house in the passenger seat of a patrol car. The roads were slick with melting frost, and the pines lining the route cast long shadows across the gravel. The house came into view slowly, its weathered siding catching the weak sunlight. It looked almost peaceful, a fragile piece built over years of abandonment and weeks of my own work. 2 officers were already stationed outside. They nodded as we approached. One of them, a younger man with close-cropped hair, stepped forward to greet us. His name was Officer Coleman, and he introduced himself as the one assigned to stay with me until further notice. "Detective says you know the property better than anyone," he said. "If there's anything off, you'll notice it before we do." "I hope I don't," I replied. We stepped inside together. The living room was untouched. The same photograph, the same cleaned floorboards, the same faint scent of pine and old paint. Nothing seemed disturbed downstairs. But when we reached the sealed room, the door still slightly ajar from my earlier escape, my chest tightened. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. The safe, the soil, the roots. But the air felt different, less heavy, less secretive. I walked inside, tracing the beam of my flashlight over the roots again, trying to see if anything else had shifted. "You okay?" Coleman asked from the doorway. "I don't know," I said honestly. "The first time I came in here, it felt like the room was holding its breath. And now? Now it feels like it's exhaling." He didn't respond, probably unsure what to make of that, but he didn't dismiss it either. We spent the next hour cataloging what remained in the room. The drives, the letters, the maps. All were bagged and prepared to be sent to state investigators. The police were careful but respectful, understanding that Turner's work deserved preservation even if it now served a legal purpose. When they finished, Coleman stayed behind while the others left. He set his bag on the table in the living room and looked around. "You've been doing a lot of work on this place," he said. "It feels like the house deserved it." He nodded thoughtfully, then walked to the window, peering out at the line of trees bending under a cold breeze. A place like this holds on to things, he said. Memories. Secrets. People underestimate that. I wasn't sure whether he was speaking metaphorically or from some deeper experience, but his words settled into me quietly. The next few days moved in slow, measured rhythms. Coleman remained close, never intrusive, but always attentive. I continued repairs on the exterior while he patrolled the grounds, sometimes circling the house, sometimes standing at the edge of the property, with binoculars scanning the tree line. At night, he slept in one of the guest rooms, his door cracked open in case anything stirred. The men did not return. But their absence didn't feel like safety. It felt like strategy. On the 5th day after the break-in, a black SUV arrived on the property. A tall woman in a dark coat stepped out, her posture straight and firm. She introduced herself as Special Agent Lydia Moore from the state's investigative bureau. Her voice carried the clipped precision of someone who didn't waste words. "We've reviewed the evidence you provided," she said. "It's substantial. More than substantial. If Turner had managed to move this forward 20 years ago, he might still be alive." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "So you think he was killed?" "I think he disappeared because someone wanted him to," she replied calmly. "Whether that ended in death or silence remains unclear." She walked the property with deliberate interest, stopping at the sealed room longer than anywhere else. Her gaze traveled slowly over the roots, the soil, the walls. "This was brilliant," she murmured almost to herself. In a grim way. A hidden archive no one would think to root out. She turned to me. Turner trusted this house more than he trusted the people around him. He believed wood and dirt were safer allies than men. "He was right," I said quietly. Agent Moore studied me for a long moment. "You're invested in this. Personally." "This house chose me," I said before thinking. But it was true. With every repaired floorboard, with every dusted wall, it felt as though Turner had left this place not for himself, but for the next person who would care enough to look deeper. To listen. Moore didn't scoff. She simply nodded once. "Then you understand why we can't let this case disappear." The investigation grew larger from that point. More agents came. More evidence was uncovered. Dozens of names appeared on Turner's lists. Contractors, middlemen, corporate fronts. Corruption layered across years, woven through bureaucracies like root systems spreading under soil. By late winter, arrests began. Quiet ones at first, then louder, more public. News vans appeared in town. Reporters asked questions that neither the police nor the bureau fully answered. People whispered Turner's name like a ghost resurrected. Justice, long buried, was finally pushing to the surface. Yet even as the truth emerged, a heaviness lingered inside me. Not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, an understanding of the cost someone had paid to keep these secrets safe long enough for someone else to find them. One evening near the end of the investigation, after Coleman and the agents had left for the night, I climbed the attic stairs alone. The boards creaked under my weight. The air was still. The tree's trunk rose through the center of the room, its roots no longer hiding anything. For the first time, the room felt empty, but not hollow. The sealed chamber had served its purpose. The strange vault Turner built had protected the truth until the right moment. And now, that moment had passed. I walked to the window and placed my hand on the cool pane. Outside, snow drifted lazily through the air, settling over the earth in a soft, white blanket. The world felt quiet again, but not suffocating, peaceful. When I turned back toward the tree, I noticed something I had never seen before. On the wall behind the roots, half hidden until now, was a faint carving. I brushed away dust and dirt until the shape revealed itself. It was a name. Turner. And beneath it, for the one who listens. I let out a slow breath, feeling something shift inside me. Turner hadn't known who would come. He hadn't needed to. He built with the faith that someone would. Someone who understood houses the way he did. Someone who could read silence like a blueprint. I stood there for a long time before descending the stairs, the message etched into me as deeply as it had been etched into the wall. Spring would come soon. The investigation would close. People would forget the details but remember the headlines. The land deals, the corruption, the arrests. But this house it wouldn't forget. And neither would I. Because some structures are more than beams and boards. They are witnesses. And some stories are not written in words, but in the spaces we uncover, the roots we dig through, the rooms we unseal. I had bought an old house at an auction, but what I found inside was not just a secret. It was a responsibility, and I carried it with me long after the last snow melted. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Check out the other videos waiting for you here. Each one has its own twist, and if this story struck a chord, share it with someone who'd love it too.